Everyone, and this is the first of our Spring 21 Faculty of Architecture Spring 21 lectures. And, I think you know from the poster that Prashant Pole has agreed to speak to us. He is the one of the co-founders of the Wadiyar School of Architecture in Mysore. And we wanted to hear about that, the buildings and the school. So welcome, Prashant. And Nilosha will now make the introductions.
Good morning, everyone. Prashant Pole is a practicing architect in Bangalore with a firm called Genesis, which was established in 1995. The practice has done varied work from residences, apartment buildings, commercial establishments to institutional and recreational buildings. The firm believes in a contextual approach to design with emphasis on finding innovative solutions. The work has been recognized and awarded in various forums. He co-founded MASA, the Malnad Architecture School Alumni, a forum which has been active in Bangalore for the last 10 years, conducting monthly talks by architects and allied professionals from within the country and abroad for an audience largely comprising of students and young practicing architects. The association has conducted over 100 events featuring about 150 speakers till date. He is also passionate about teaching and has been a visiting faculty at institutions in Bangalore and around since the past 2 decades. At present, he is associated with the Wadiyar Center of Architecture in Mysore and is the co-founder with 10 other like-minded architect friends. Looking forward to your lecture, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Anjali, and thank you, Sept, for having me present our school here on this wonderful forum. One couldn't have asked for more to, how do you say, talk about our college beyond the boundaries of the COVID state right now, if you want to call it that. We haven't talked much about ourselves, otherwise within the national stage, if you want to call it that. We've been quiet and doing what we have been doing in Mysore for the last 5 or 6 years. So this is probably the first step of talking about ourselves on a slightly larger platform. And thank you, Anjali, and thank you, Sept, for having allowed us this lovely opportunity. I'll just start off with the presentation straight away, and a lot of the stuff will come along with it. Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. This is a story which actually started right at the time, I guess, one joined architecture, because this is a story as long as that, if you want to put it that way. So I'll just run you through one small brief introduction to where did it start from. All of us, the 10 or 11 of us, out of which barring Manoj and Manjunath. Manjunath is a structural engineer who has been coming and teaching at Sept in the last 1.5 years at the structure studio. He's from UVC Bangalore, and Manoj is from BMS Bangalore. The other 9 of us come from this school, which you see the board there, Malnad College of Engineering Architecture Workshop that you see there. This is a school which opened in 1980 and lasted till 2000, exactly 20 years. Produced about 500 and odd architects, but then unfortunately the department closed. So we call ourselves the limited edition. So we are a limited edition batch of students from this wonderful school, which did some fantastic work in the 20 years that it survived, but then had to close down for lack of faculty and lack of commitment on the management side to continue the course, though the course was doing so well. So our journey, College of Engineering in Hassan, is about 180 kilometers away from Bangalore. And the school ran purely out of the faculty who used to travel 2 days a week from Bangalore to Hassan and back, and largely survived on visiting faculty, hardly any permanent faculty in the campus. And we would, how do you say, spend time waiting for which car is coming this week and which is coming the next weekend, hoping that they don't come. So you get more time. But anyway, so those 20 years were absolutely beautiful, and in our own ways we also gave back. And once we finished our course and within 4 or 5 years of either working or teaching or whatever, all of us have gone back and taught in this school in some for a year, 2 years, 3 years. I did 3 years stint till the school closed, and all of us have given back in some ways to the school. That's of course college time. So yeah, pretty old. I mean, this is 1983, and that's when you're sitting in the class and doodling. I mean, that's Professor Kanade in my sketchbook somewhere at the back, last sheet, if I'm not wrong. I mean, the point is that, I mean, without teachers like that, we wouldn't have been what we are. The whole idea being that a set of dedicated people and the right kind of attitude to education. I mean, that produced, or that is the backbone of what we as practicing architects after 30 years still value. And school that we call the Wadia Center for Architecture. The next big thing that happened after that was the school closed. This was 2000, the school closed. The last by the batch which had joined in 2000, they walked out in 2005, and after that, technically the department didn't exist anymore. And in 2006, I remember I was, Anjali was there if I'm not wrong, I was asked on a forum which Aniket used to run for some time, for 2-3 years, where 12 architects, but then there were more than 12 architects. There were 35 in the year that I wrong. I brought my whole office along when this presentation happened, and we managed to get a meeting with Doshi sir in his house. And we were at his house, and I remember this conversation when he used to talk about, I used to come to IIM and we used to have such wonderful talks in Bangalore with architect friends, like that. And what is the scene in Bangalore now? I mean, any vibe? Are you guys doing something? And as part of that conversation, he also brought up a thing about we have become so, what do you say, so engrossed with our own practices and our own futures and our own trajectories of growth, if you want to call them that, we have stopped thinking institutions, in the sense that he didn't mean institutions in the vein of educational institutions, but the whole act of building, whatever what call an institution. And we have stopped doing that anymore. And as architects, I think it's our duty to do something where give back to society in some ways as a profession. And somewhere that thing stuck in the head, in the sense that along with your practices, I think it's our duty. It's also a responsibility, if you want to call it that, to give back in some ways. And this became an excuse. It's the fact that the school had closed and we didn't have an address, if you want to call it that, gave birth to this association called MASA, which was in college. How do you say it? Opened up as Malnad Architecture Students Association, and now it was called the Malnad Architecture School Alumni. So the acronym still remained, but then the definition changed. And what we did was that if we are not there in the physical world as a campus, at least in the virtual world, we remain as a campus. So the idea was that MASA would live, and the Malnad Architecture Department would live as long as we stay bonded together. And over 10 years or 11 years now, 2007 was the first MASA event. And we have done an event every month and an annual event. This is a poster of an annual event where we would have 5 or 6 speakers from within the country and abroad. And the other events would be monthly events where you would have speakers from within the country, sometimes from abroad if they're traveling and whatever. And the audience was basically students and young practicing architects, and giving them a platform to also present. The idea was that young practices rarely get a chance to either get published or to present their work. And this became a platform for practices within Bangalore and within South India, or even sometimes across the country, to come and present their work to an audience of largely young people. So the dialogue would be much more animated, and the discussions would also be very interesting. Unfortunately, the last 1 year, because of this COVID thing, we have been kind of shut down, and hope to restart this set of events once more. So in the process, we have done about 100 events, if I'm not wrong, and about more than 175 speakers from around the globe who have come and spoken at this platform. That's one of the posters where Bimal sir had presented. He's presented twice at MASA. A whole lot of speakers from Ahmedabad have come and presented at MASA. Megal sitting here is also presented at MASA. So there's a big big body of work which has been documented and collected over the last 10 or 12 years, which is shared sometimes in school and in other schools, and people ask for these talks, and it helps especially students where you're not exposed to this kind of work. And the idea was not to necessarily bring in architects who are well published and who are written about all the time, but work of architects across the globe also, doing very quiet work, very simple work, sometimes in remote parts of the globe, not heard of, not talked about, not even published sometimes. So the idea was to dig out such people and find them, and some of the names here you wouldn't have heard also. I mean, somebody like a Zia Imran or a Simon Friso or a Wangrit Bunag. So a lot of these architects are quite work being done in remote parts of the globe, and then you dig, hunt, net, whatever you have to do, and then convince them to come and speak here. So this was the beginnings of our engagement with this idea of how do you start beginning to engage with society at large as a profession, as architects, and create this dialogue where not just the people within the profession, even outside the profession would get help from this kind of dialogues. So that brought us to this point where 10 of us were teaching in a school in Mysore called the USD, University School of Design, which was run by the University of Mysore. One of our professors was given the job as a director there. So he said, as long as I have my 5-year term, please come and help me out. So we started in 2010, and 8 or 10 of us used to travel as usual 2 days a week to Mysore, spend 2 days with kids, do some fantastic work on campus, and then get back. Unfortunately, that association lasted for about 3 years because he lost his term, and then we ran into some trouble with the management, and we were forced to quit. And just when we left the campus, within a month or so, this is probably end of 2013, and by 2014, we said if we don't do something seriously about this, we will probably go back to the old routine of finding schools which are close to our houses or close to our practices, and then we disband, and the whole energy of having come together to do something is again gone. So we immediately formed a trust called Design Foster, Foundation for Education Research, in January of 2014, and with no idea actually of what we would be doing. The idea was that we formalize this engagement that we have of that 8 or 10 of us who were teaching here to somehow get together, and then we'll see along the way what happens. And within a month or two, by February or March, there was already this idea of a school being floated, saying that let's start a school of architecture. But then we have been hearing the story for so long. I mean, every architect friend or every architect you've worked with, or senior architects, or even our teachers at one point, I mean, you've heard this banter on starting schools of architecture or wanting to start a school of architecture. It's every architect's dream, if you'd ask me that. And not an easy thing, and also taken with a pinch of salt at that time, saying, okay, let's see. I mean, good idea. I mean, let's sleep on it. But then somewhere along the way, within a month or two, it suddenly started gathering steam, and then discussion started, where would it be? And then we said not Bangalore, because there are already so many colleges in Bangalore. And there was also already this journey to Mysore, which had become a habit, which was also a habit because of journey to Hassan in the school days then, and teaching in Hassan. And the whole idea that you disconnect with your city, you disconnect with your work, you disconnect with your offices, you disconnect with family also at some point, that these 2 days that you're away there is purely 2 days spent what you're supposed to be doing. And we wanted that space back. The journey of traveling to these places, talking along the way, discussing each other's studios, discussing students' works, what he or she is doing, where would that go, and sometimes dreaming of those projects probably more than the students themselves do sometimes. And hence Mysore became the obvious choice. A smaller city, few colleges, and of course the travel time was just about right, 2.5, 3 hours, and you're in Mysore, and the next 2 days you don't worry about anything else in the world. And then the hunt for a place started. Unfortunately, because of Puke, who is one of the partners here, his lawyer knew the Queen of Mysore. He was doing some work for her, and he said, why don't you have a chat with her? They have a lot of property in Mysore, obviously. So if they're interested, you could talk to them. So after looking at 2 or 3 of the properties which he suggested, we landed up with this one, which is in the heart of the city of Mysore. It's right next to the Jilla Panchayat, which is on the left of it. And right behind this is the University of Mysore. And the boulevard in the front is the only double road in Mysore, which is called the Krishnaraja Boulevard. So it's a very important, it's a heritage road. If all the heritage buildings dot this boulevard. You have the Maharajas College, the Maharani's College, the Jilla Panchayat, the court complex, which is right next door to our college. So a very prominent location, and they ran a school beyond the red line on the right hand side. What you see is the school which was run by the Wadiyars, she said, okay, there is this available. This place has been closed for some time, and we would want to kind of get some activities running here. So when we walked into the campus, it looked like this. There was this old building in the front, which was the hostel for the school kids, which was a charity hostel for the Ursu community, that is the King's community. So the kids would stay in this hostel. The building behind was a few classrooms, and on the right, the campus which they had was a school which they were running. And all these buildings were defunct. These buildings, the building behind is about 100 and 110 years old. The building in the front is about 80 years old. Not used for more than 15, 20, or probably even 25 years. Debris all over the place. But there was something about this place. I mean, just the fact that there's a quietness to it, lovely trees. I mean, the whole land was filled with wonderfully grown trees. This was the space between the two buildings, the hostel in the front and the building at the back. That's the building at the back, which had a few classrooms running in it. And this court kind of space in between the two buildings. And behind that was a shed right at the back there, which is behind the library that you see. And this is the state we found this property in. And she said, I can give you a boundary around these buildings and you can start here. So to tell you what the initial thoughts were that we didn't imagine ourselves being here permanently. So we signed an agreement with her saying that the idea was that the Council of Architecture wanted us to have a 2-acre land. I mean, that's the norms as with the council, that you need 2 acres of land to start a school of architecture. And we thought that we would temporarily reside here, kind of for a year or two. And the council had said, within 2 years, you should show us that you have 2 acres of land and you're serious and you intend to start a school of architecture on your own property. Nowhere was there this idea that one could do this otherwise. So we didn't intend to stay here permanently. So the idea was that we would occupy this space for some time and then move on and make our own campus on a 2-acre piece of land within a year or two somewhere. So I'll come back to that, why that is important. RCC slabs. So the peripheral ones are 4-column supports and the intermediate ones are 2 columns. And what Manju calls is this idea of the weave. So they're not welded joints. So each member passes through the other one. So purlin passes through a set of columns and then the next one passes through the other one. And it's like the strength comes because you weave this structure together and not stick it together. So the difference is what happens when you weave something as against when you stick something. When you stick something, it could come unglued. But whereas when you weave something, it's not easy to remove it. So the strength comes out of that whole idea of weaving. So those are the initial structural ideas of. So if you look at the structure, it's almost non-existent. It's so frail and so light. And then the sheeting happened, and then the first studios came in. And with that, we moved into the first block with the first batch of students. So they were the guinea pigs of this 5 years of our journey, because they kept moving from building to building for every year that they managed in the 5 years that they were here in college. So that's the first block. So the idea was that there were 2-3 ideas which were critical to this. One, that the fact that we were using industrial materials and how not to make it look industrial. How do you bring in the warmth then? How do you make this place livable in a manner that it doesn't feel like it is absolutely an industrial product? So the idea was to create this set of sliding folding doors, which Nagesh did, who was again one of our partners, who was the principal there for the last 3.5 years. He worked out this fantastic detail of sliding folding doors in pine wood, which then brought in the warmth, which then brought in suddenly this whole attitude of, how do you say, domesticating this so-called industrial space. and making it livable. So the idea of wood and steel coming together was absolutely wonderful. And then you see that once you open up all the doors, then the whole idea of enclosure, the whole idea of what is in and what is out suddenly vanishes. And then you could collapse them and use them for so many reasons. I mean, and so that was the second idea, the idea of how do you handle an opening. And the third idea was then what is the external wall? So the external wall was this clay block wall, which is unplastered both inside and outside. But then because it was two materials or two different types of building, one is dry construction and the other one is wet construction. Steel is dry construction, whereas masonry is wet construction. So how do you work out details where the dry and the wet don't meet? So the idea is that the steel remains separate and the brick remains separate all the time. So whether it is in section or whether it is in plan, the details were worked out in a manner that the columns are always free of the wet construction. So the masonry would never touch a column. And so that was the first idea that started with this building. So that's the exhibition space as it opens on to the courtyard, and then also doubles up as jury space during the days, and sometimes, as you know, juries go on well into the night. So there are people hanging around, there are juries happening. Anybody in the corridor can see which class is having a jury and who's walking. Anybody who walks into any jury. There are no doors which say that you can't walk into a space. Most of the classrooms are open all the time, so any student from any class could walk into any class. And there are no partitions between classrooms, between two batches of 40 students also. There are also display panels. So one could move display panels and combine the two classes if required or keep them separate. So these were the ideas, initial ideas of how one would imagine a learning space in that environment. The next building came towards the road, which housed two lecture halls, a computer lab in the ground floor, and two sets of studios above. The reason being that the studios had to become larger because we found that the studios we had done in the first building were not large enough. So which led to a change in the way of looking at the whole idea of steel itself. It was again the same idea of 4 columns, but then we spaced them. I mean, we were getting a little more adventurous now. From a 5-meter span, we increased it to a 8-meter span. Now, the 8-meter span again was not sufficient for a studio, so it has a 2.5-meter cantilever on either side. So you had this idea of a mushroom column. So the mushroom column allowed for 2.5-meter cantilever on either sides with reducing the span in between the mushrooms. And then you get a studio which is almost 40 feet wide. But then it has columns towards the periphery of the studio. So the idea of the mushroom, which allowed for the actual column to still go through. The 4 columns or the 4 members in between still go through. But the mushroom keeps springing out of those 4 members at every level and allows you for intermediate slabs in between so that the construction can continue to happen without stopping the flow of the steel fabrication. The fabrication continues to happen. You can continue to do slabs in between. So with that, so you look at this, you see the mushroom, and then again the whole idea of the weave between the purlins and how that gives rigidity to the whole thing, and how the central column still continues to go ahead without stopping for the mushroom. The mushroom goes in between the columns or in between the members, if you see that photograph there. So that allowed us for a computer lab at the lower level, which was column free, with lecture halls on either side. So those are lecture halls on either side. You see the mushroom on one side there. And on the, so that photograph on the right shows you that 2.5-meter cantilever on either side with the columns still being part of the studio. And that opens on to terraces, which then become spill-out spaces. Kukke, who again one of the partners, also designed the drafting tables for all the studios. So if you look at it, it opens up, allows you to put your backpack inside, because most of these backpacks now are the favorite thing that students carry. Nobody carries anything which is rectangular anymore. They're all round. So that allowed for the drafting table to open. You put your backpack inside, put it back, finish your drafting. You could lift the table, you could tilt the table, you could do all that. So all the studios now have these drafting tables right now. And so the idea was, architecturally one looks at it, it is the idea of the veranda of the admin block, which was the language of the old building, which was carried on and wrapped around the new building. The idea being that there is continuity with respect to the old, there is some respect to what the existing is, and the idea of that porosity that one sees in the old facade is carried on as an idea into the new facade also. Though the material changes, the language of the openings change, but the idea of porosity and the idea of the scale of that building, so that the second floor of the building doesn't come on to the road or come on to the to the main facade. It is kind of tucked inside. So this red wrap is, the height of that red wrap is almost the same height as the admin block. And the idea of the corridor, or the idea of the perforated facade, continues on to the two surfaces. So that, and the last floor is what we call our cathedral. That's the that's the studio on top, which has these two cantilevers on either side. And because there is so much of greenery on all sides, and it's a 40-feet space, we also had issues with light, because how do you light a 12-meter wide space where you have drafting tables in the middle, and they also should not face issues with light. So the sides are all opened up because there's phenomenal greenery on all sides, and you also have display panels in between. And that then allowed us to experiment with one more new material, that was this corrugated zinc sheet. So the idea of a metal wall, because you couldn't build clay block or masonry on a steel structure, so then that would defeat the whole purpose. I mean, the whole idea that you're making masonry sit on a lighter structure would go against the grain of the idea itself. So the idea was that the walls on top now would become lighter, they would become metal with insulation in between. So it's about a 4-inch C channel with a corrugated zinc sheet or outside, 2 inches of puff panel in between, and then a cement board on the inside. So all put together, the whole thing becomes about 100 thick, and that becomes the wall of the upper floors. So the masonry at the bottom gives weight, adds visual weight to the whole building, but then separated off from the metal structure, so that the metal structure then becomes light and kind of floats on this masonry base, if you want to call it that. So that's the idea of the lower block, where you see the perforation on the masonry, and the metal box kind of gets inserted into that box. So it's like a box within a box. So the metal box is inserted into this masonry box in some ways. And the two materials are kept separate so that they don't at any point mesh with each other. So towards the road, you still see this language of a facade, which is very similar to the old building. You see the idea of the perforation, you see the idea of the corridor, but you don't see this metal box from anywhere. The metal box is hidden inside that inside that masonry structure. And the studios became larger, obviously, but then the idea was that it would allow for space like this. It would allow for space for discussion. You could push your tables aside. It allows people to occupy that space to do whatever they wanted on the floor, or whatever else that you want to do when a jury happens, or you want to pull in your display panel. So the studio sizes are actually double the size that the council recommends. The council recommends 120 square meters. We are at more than 200 square meters. And even now we find it short. So we didn't compromise on the size of what we were building. We were only looking at ways in which we could achieve those sizes, which then allowed you for all these possibilities of making those studios vibrant and, how do you say, do more than what they were supposed to do, which led us to the third block, which happened in the year 2017. So every year we were producing a block. With every new batch that was coming in, we would have a foundation day and we would have an opening day. So the foundation day of the block and then the opening day of the block. The third block came up with a new set of requirements, which was not there initially, was a hall which could accommodate 400 people. Eventually, we would have 5 batches of 80 each, so that's 400 students with faculty. So we needed a space where you could accommodate all of them in case there is a talk, there is an event, there is a show, or any of these things. So the ground floor is envisaged as a multi-purpose space where you could do all this. So the span now became much more larger. So a little more adventurous. From a 7-meter span, we moved on to a almost 11-meter span. So it became 37 feet across the two columns, and the language had to change. So the mushroom idea had to be dropped. Now it became triangulated purlins, or triangulated trusses in between the columns, which were cantilevered, balanced cantilever on either side. So you have 2.5-meter cantilever towards the Panchayat, Jilla Panchayat, and 2.5-meter cantilever, which holds the corridor. So that balanced cantilever kind of takes care of the span, and then you still have the north light truss on top and the double height corridor on the right there. And these were snaps of that triangulated purlin, or the triangulated truss, which kind of held the purlin, which has got a staggered way of tying the triangles, as unlike what is normally done. And it looks beautiful where it was being done, because one was imagining if only the structure was the skylight. If only that triangulated purlin would allow light. It would have been, I mean, it's a beautiful idea to pursue somewhere where the structure would then become a source of light. So this was when the decking was still in progress, and we had stopped the decking to see how it would look if the light passed through the structure. And if that actually became the skylight. Well, that's an idea probably which will be tried somewhere else. So that's the method of the triangulated purlins with the. So if you look at that, you'll realize that the decking is going on below, but the structure on top is still continuing. So the fabrication is a non-stop process, and in fact we concreted all the 2 slabs together after we finished the entire fabrication. So we didn't wait for concreting, because concreting happened much later. And then that happened to the truss on top, and then we dropped the idea of the sliding folding door and restricted ourselves to only sliding doors, because folding had some issues with getting the movement as smooth as you would want it to. So these are sliding doors, 3 in a panel, which should slide one against each other. And that opens up to the garden on the other side. And those are the tables which, as I said, Cook had designed. And you also get a sense of what the triangulated purlin on top is doing, which also opened up possibilities of how do you look at services. So all the electrical and everything that was done in all these 3 buildings runs on cable trays. They don't run in the RCC slabs. The cable trays then pass on to the electrical points to the cement board on the light wall that is there on the periphery, and then you bring in your electrical points through that. So that is how it looks towards the court now. So you have all the sliding folding or sliding doors which kind of open up, and each of these floors is actually 2 studios. So technically the multipurpose hall below is 2 studios. So 2, 4, 6 here, 2 in the previous block 8, and 2 in the first block that we had done. So that is 5 years and 10 studios. And with this, we had kind of completed all the infrastructure that the college needed. So the whole idea of a window had to be questioned, saying that when you have such lovely greenery outside, such fantastic landscape outside, the idea of a window had to be relooked at. I mean, is it a window or is it a door? So the point was the whole thing opened up, and when you open it up, there is no obstruction between the inside and the outside. There is not even that sill wall that you are normally used to. So it's almost like you're on the ground. Each studio looks like it's just walking out into the green. Which brings us to questions which one asks in AD studio sometimes. When is a door a door? And when it is closed, it's a partition. When it's open, it's an opening. So when is a door actually? So a door is a door only in the act of opening, not when it is closed and not when it is open. So questions like this of what is a window, what is a door, what is the wall, what is the truss? All these questions were being, how do you say, reopened, re-questioned, just to figure out, are there new ways of doing this? Are there other ways of looking at this? Because in a school of architecture, that is what one would want to do. To have this ability for your students to also question these same things over and over again. Not taking anything for granted, even though your experience tells you to do certain things in a certain manner. But this was an opportunity to question all those things which you have taken for granted. And find new answers to familiar questions again. So that's the double corridor where you can look up from the upper studio down into the lower studios. And the ground floor, that entire multipurpose hall opens on to the setback area, which is all paved, so that when there's a event, people can walk out, walk in. I mean, there's a class happening there, some students come out, sit below the tree, sit and sketch there or do their models there, then walk back into the class. So the space allows for also, that's the idea of the walling method that happens on top as against the masonry at the lower level. Which brings us to the last block, which was the block right at the back there, which we converted into the canteen. And that canteen then has become like a lung, and in between buildings, wherever we could find spaces where some trees had to be saved, or one had to space out buildings because of a level difference, smaller courtyards or smaller spaces for people to gather. So between the building 2 and building 3, there was a small drop, and we had to space out buildings because there were 2 trees in between. That became a space where a class of about 30-40 students can easily gather. So sometimes a class happens there. So the scale of open spaces is the key to this whole campus, because the idea is that we didn't have the money to build everything. So the program could not be completed with built structures only. So how much of this program can you manage with the unbuilt? And how much does that contribute to the built? So the idea is that you always do this constant give and take to understand how much is actually that you require as a building, and how much can you appropriate, how much can you take from the outside, or how much can you create space in between buildings or otherwise, which adds to your program or adds to the activity that you could do. And so that is the canteen, which was the last old building, which was a shed at the back there, which became this pantry and canteen. And then we added a roof behind, and that level difference continued. So that became an amphitheater for all the play fields. There's a basketball court and a volleyball court and all that at the back there. And at the end of the third building became a OAT for specific functions. I mean, you have a dance performance or you have a drama or stuff like that. So that would become an OAT for those kind of activities. So a multitude of open spaces, all having different characters, different scales, basically, more than character, because it depends on what kind of scale allows what kind of activity. A space which can gather 200 people is not the same space where 10 people can sit comfortably. So the idea is that students, whether they're in groups of 5 or 10, or whether in groups of 30 or 40, everybody finds some niche, or everybody finds some space in the campus where they could hang out. So that's the canteen with the steps down there looking at the playfield, ending at the amphitheater at the other end. So this is what you see against from the playfield towards the canteen. A very light tubular truss structure there, which holds the roof and basically just provides shade for people to sit. Nothing more than that. That was the initial model which was done. Obviously, it's changed. It's no longer these humongous blocks which we had designed at that point of time. They've all become broken, smaller, much to scale kind of blocks now as against what they were. So I'll just take a pause here to talk about a few things before I move on to the next slide. What are the ideas that go into what I've talked about right now is the making. What is the thinking that went behind this? Why is this the way it is? Now, there are 3-4 key ideas to this campus, which I would want to share. One is, which I had referred to earlier, was as a practice, we've also been noticing that programs and longevity of buildings or permanence of buildings is in question. Do we require buildings to be permanent anymore? Because are programs permanent anymore? I mean, all of us have seen that there are programs of buildings changing constantly now. And post-COVID, there are at least another 3-4 building types which have vanished, where people used to gather in such large numbers before. So it's not just the larger programs, even smaller programs, whether it is residences or houses or even houses for individual clients that we do sometimes. You sometimes wonder and ask the clients, do you think you're going to be living in the same city forever? And half of them are answered, they don't have the right answer to that, saying that I may live here for the next 3-4 years. I don't know where I'm going to be next. So the program of a building now is in question in terms of how much is then the longevity of a building. Do we build permanent architecture with permanent programs anymore? So that was inquiry number 1, or that was the question number 1, which then leads us to the fact that hence we require flexible programs and an architecture which is light enough to accommodate those flexible programs, or which can be imagined in a manner where programs can be flexible, which was inquiry number 1. Inquiry number 2 was this idea of how does one build with the old. We had these 2 old buildings right in the middle, and it was a no-brainer right from day one that all you would do was 2 rectangular blocks on the side. But what would those 2 rectangular blocks be? The answer was obvious, the 2 rectangular blocks on the side, and there's nothing else that one can do about this, given the size of property that was marked for us. But what would they be? And that brings us to the next inquiry, or which I would say, which forced me to, how do you say, dig within, because some of these answers one has to find from within. You can't find them from without. I mean, it was very easy to do a Google search and check CEPT and all the best campuses in the world and pick ideas, if you want to call them that. But that was the last thing one wanted to do. So I said that when you're looking at that blank sheet of paper, one would want to see what is there inside that one would want to bring out in a situation like this. And the obvious thing that was there was that we're all small practices with, I would say, great attitude to the profession, but not having yet got there, if you want to call it that. So the point is that, and on the other side, we are also not academics in the academic sense. We are professionals dabbling in academics. Now, there's a huge difference there. I can't claim myself or any of us to be academics in that sense, in the true sense of the word. We are professionals who love academics and are dabbling in academics. So there's a difference between the two. So with these 3 things, 2-3 things in mind, and the third thing was, here we are in partnership with the king or the queen of Mysore on a piece of property which belongs to them, which has buildings which they have done. and which obviously brings to the entire attitude of what this family has done for Mysore and Karnataka state per se, especially in the field of education. The Mysore University, the Indian Institute of Science, Raman Institute, all the major educational institutions in Karnataka state have something that they owe to the royal family. And these two buildings, though architecturally may not seem much, they represent that attitude. They represent this phenomenal amount of contribution that this family has done in the field of education. And here we are, a fledgling group of 8 or 10 people doing one department of 40 students. And we are in partnership with somebody like this. So it brings in a huge sense of responsibility, also a huge sense of humility along with it. Saying that you can't call yourselves equal with somebody like that. With somebody who's done so much in this field, especially in this field of education for an entire state over decades, sometimes over centuries. And to call ourselves equal in that sense would be, I would say, absolutely unethical. So the buildings that we were doing there would have to respect what those two buildings represent, not architecturally, but as a contribution of a particular family. Hence, those two buildings had to be given that importance. Hence the library had to be that building, and the building in the front had to be, how do you say, flanked by buildings which would be quiet and not shout and scream for attention, saying that I'm here, I'm the new kid on the block. So the idea was that we would be there, but we would be there quietly next to these huge achievements which are there. So that was the second line of thought which was running in the mind. The third line of thought was this whole idea of sustainability, which I talked about when I said program. So in today's time and space, sustainability, though we talk about green buildings and the gadgetry and LEED and all the other stuff that comes with sustainability, the first question that one would want to ask is, this whole idea of building for permanence, is that a sustainable idea at all? Given the fact that all our land in the urban areas are begging to be asked back. I mean, I have seen in my own career at least 2 or 3 of the buildings have already got demolished in a career which has hardly lasted 25 years. And what do you get back after these buildings get demolished? Only debris. There is nothing you can salvage out of it. So in that context, does it mean that we need to think differently when we build now? Are our programs sustainable? Are our ways of building sustainable? Then we'll look at the other things. Are our gadgets sustainable? That'll come much later. So the whole imagination of how does one make a project or a program sustainable enough on a plot of land so that the plot of land can be given. It is exactly what the Queen said. Will you give me back these buildings the way they were? I would say I will give you back the land the way it was, with as minimal damage to it as possible, with as minimal lightness with which one could sit on that piece of land. So that is another key idea which was running at the back of the mind, saying that this is how one would want to imagine something like this. And the last one was, if this is a place of learning, I mean, which is another huge cross to carry, if one were to say. It's like asking an architect to build his own house, because every time you draw a line, you're wondering who's looking over your shoulder. Yeah, so the issue here was you're not just building your own house, you're building your own school of architecture in the way you would want to build it. So the question there was then, what kind of space, or what kind of institute would this be? And at the same time, there were debates and discussions going on what kind of architect or what kind of teaching would happen in the school. And one thread of thought which ran through all those discussions was it would definitely be a space for learning and not a space for teaching. Because, which brings me to the next slide, I'll just run through this fast, because we call this pedagogy. And when we call it pedagogy, pedagogy is a faculty-centered education. It talks about teacher being important. It talks about students gravitating to teachers for everything and anything that happens in the campus. And the relationship between the faculty and the student is that, I mean, the faculty runs the show, the students are there drawing from the faculty in terms of what it is. So the idea was to move away from this, basically because the question when we started was, with internet around, I mean, compared to our own kinds of education where the teacher was the instructor, With internet around, students don't need information anymore. So if information is available, then what are we as teachers there then? So the next question was, this is a research done by one of my students when I was doing an institution design, just like what Anjali was saying when she did her 6-semester design on campuses. This is a student of mine who had done this research on teaching. The task given to them was, are there other ways of teaching? And this is her research, which I'm sharing with you. So she brought up this thing called, there is this thing called andragogy, where the teacher then becomes the mentor. And students now are on a self-exploration mode where they figure out stuff by themselves. And the teacher is there only as a mentor, where the teacher comes in as and when required to mentor the students. Otherwise, the students are in their own modes of learning. From where one would want to move, ideally, to a state where the school is a place where there is study material, there is research, there are students, and there are teachers, but all in the same soup. So the idea is that it becomes a place for learning for everybody, not just the students. The teachers are also in a perennial state of learning. The students are in a perennial state of learning, and everybody who walks in also. And it is no longer an experience where somebody is teaching something to somebody. Everybody is teaching everything to everybody. It's like me taking my students' research material to talk about this right now. I mean, I'm learning something from what she did. So the point is that one would want a space like that. And why I bring this up is because this is exactly what one would want in the campus. The idea that a campus without doors, a campus without walls, a campus without partitions, a campus where learning is available all the time to everybody. And does the building or does the environment allow that? Where I don't have to knock a door to ask for permission to walk into somebody's class. Where my intrusion is seen as an intrusion. As against where I just walk in where nobody even questions my presence there. Whether it is a teacher or whether it's a student. So that is the fourth thought which was running in the back of the mind. The idea of our association with the king, our ideas of what does one mean by sustainability in the larger sense, our ideas of what a learning and teaching environment should be. And these are thoughts just drawn from, which is the reason why I started this journey a little early, saying because this is 20, 25, 30 years of being in the education field in that sense, in the teaching learning environment, which has shaped these thoughts over the years. Which kind of, I'm not saying that we have got this right. This is again a learning experience. Probably when the next building happens, we'll try something else. I don't know what that next thing is going to be. So I'll just run you through fast in terms of what happens with these kind of ideas, in terms of getting students to, the idea is that learning is that much more fun when it is related to experiences. Experiences of having been there, experiences of having done it, experiences of having learned by doing something. And whether it is one-on-one models of AD studios where students are actually doing models of their AD studio in one-on-one scale, not in 1-5, 1-10, not making drawings necessarily, but actually living those spaces. So we have the huge playground at the back there. So all that is used for doing these models of AD studios, construction models, understanding construction through the idea of forces. Having done these exercises, you'll never forget what is compression and tension. Which part of your body is suffering what and because of what. So these are things which whether you're doing trusses, making failure models to understand why things break, rather than not models of how to make beautiful models, of making models to understand why they fail and what are the forces in play there. This is again Kuke handling his BC studio with a simple truss to understand why do you require struts, why do you require ties, and what are the loads in play there. Then a whole series of workshops which keep happening. Every alternate semester is a workshop semester or a vertical studio semester. So 3 days or 4 days of workshops where the entire campus is involved in some workshop or the other. So whether it's stained glass, watercolor, origami, cartooning and caricature, dance, if somebody is interested in dance, drama, sculpture, a vertical studio where Sumitro, Bijoy, Girish, all these people were mentors for the entire campus across 80 students, across all the batches. And each one had about 20 students for 3 days. And this was what came out of the vertical studio workshop. that was a very initial rendering of what we were intending to do. And these are the 11 of us involved with this campus. I'll just read them out. Last row from the left, Anand Krishnamurthy, also a graduate of CEPT, Masters in Urban Design. Next to him, Kuke Subramania, whose work I showed you, the drafting table and the BC classes. Me in the middle, Ryan on my left, Nelson Pius, again a graduate of CEPT, Masters Studio. Below him, Anand Prakash. Next to him, Nagesh, principal, again a graduate of CEPT, Masters Urban Design. Manjunath BL, most of you in CEPT must have seen him in between. Srinivas in between with his broken hand. He's the senior most of us. Anjali will recognize him. Vidya Shankar next to him, and Manoj at the last. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Prashant. That was a brilliant presentation. I don't think you had to pause for anything because you are so involved with the whole thing. But it was really, really interesting. And I also think there's so many sort of things that have worked together to make this happen, you know. Number one, I think it is a really nice place for students of architecture to study architecture, because you can see all of these things. You know, you can see the skeleton that's holding up the building, and you can understand all of this from the environment that you are in. So I think that's wonderful. I think serendipity played a role in the whole thing in terms of the queen or the king wanting, you know, the place back at some time so that your touch was light, you know, that it wouldn't have to demolish so much of what you would have done. So all of that put together, and I think at the, you know, the presentation was so down to earth, and yet there were all of these ideas that were informing it at the end, as you explained, right? But it was really, really wonderful to listen to you. And I'm not going to waste more time. We'll just open it up for questions. So you can put your questions up on chat, and then Prashant can respond to that, or just you know, unmute and show yourselves and ask the questions.
Well, by the time the first question comes, I'll just continue for 2 minutes more, because I stopped with one point still in the offing. Institutions like this, or any institution for that matter, including your CEPT there, are all finally not brick and mortar. I mean, it's finally people. And without the right kind of people, or without the right kind of input that people bring to this entire setup, none of these things work. We have been extremely fortunate to have had teachers right from day one till now who are extremely committed and who have done a fantastic job in this journey that I talked about, of finding a learning space, not just for the students, for themselves also. I mean, just yesterday we were doing a lesson plan which closed yesterday, and the teachers were not talking about what the syllabus is saying and what this semester is going to be about. What am I going to learn from teaching this semester? So that all these teachers are bringing to the table, and that's a phenomenal, how do you say, a phenomenal space to be in, to find a set of committed teachers who are that involved, and who would want to bring that much more to the table every time they teach the same subject sometimes, and find new ways of looking at it. For example, history was being looked at one semester through the lens of structure. Sometimes it's looked at through the lens of culture, some other times through the lens of people. And every time the same teacher is teaching it, he or she is bringing something to the table which they had not explored before. So which forces them to read a new set of books every time, though the content is still the same. And nothing brings this more to the fore than what happened last year with the COVID and stuff like that. So when you go to the campus and seeing an empty campus for a year, I mean, that's when you realize that your architecture is still incomplete without the people. I mean, it's a great building, that's a different story, but how long do you see it? I mean, that's not important. At the end of it, that building has to be occupied. I mean, and it has to do what it is supposed to do as an institution. And that happens only when the people who are meant to be there occupy that space. And I think somewhere we have lost that touch in the business of objectifying architecture. We have lost that touch of what people mean to space. And without the right people, the architecture is still incomplete. Without the right activity, without the people inhabiting that space, you don't complete the architecture. And the last year was the biggest learning from that particular aspect, if one wants to call it that. And that I think is a key to any institution, or to any institution building exercise that one would want to call, that the people finally make the space.
Yeah, except that I do feel that also the environment has to be inspiring, you know, in that sense. Like when we were at CEPT in the 70s, I mean, the openness of the curriculum was also reflected in the sort of environment in which we sort of, you know, had our education. No, I think, yeah, all of these points that you've made are just absolutely brilliant. And I mean, I might start with a very sort of funny question, which has very little to do with. But you know, what about fire hazard in terms of these steel structures? Because I practiced for many years in San Francisco, which is, you know, there's a lot of problems with earthquake, and we do structural steel assemblies or wooden assemblies for the smaller scale projects. And this was a big issue, that with exposed structural steel, because, you know, they would, of course, gunite and cover that in concrete, so that in case there was a fire, the structure would not, you know, sort of melt and be dangerous for the inhabitants. Is that an issue at all, or
it is an issue?
Did you think?
It is an issue. We haven't fully addressed it. I totally agree with you on that. Because, like I said, most of these are structures which were even in the sanction of these buildings have been taken as temporary structures.
Yes.
So it's a G+1, G+2 kind of thing, well within the fire bylaws, and some amount of basic precaution in terms of paint and protecting the steel structures has been done. But I won't claim that it is a fireproof or a fire retardant measure in any ways. So that
but you have a fair amount of masonry also for the enclosure, right?
That is only on the periphery. The periphery is enclosed, which is like a fort wall, if you want to call it that.
Yeah,
and the interior is all exposed then.
Yeah. One more question to do with this construction itself.
Yeah.
Now, Mysore, fortunately, has a very sort of salubrious climate, you know. It doesn't get too hot and it doesn't get too cold.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it may not be a big issue. But do you think the zinc sheets and all that, do they help with sort of climate control inside, or?
The wall and the ceiling is a puff panel which is 75 mm thick.
Insulated, yeah.
Insulated, and the wall is a corrugated zinc sheet with, again, 50 mm insulation, a puff panel insulation, like a refrigerator in between, with a cement board on the inside. So on both directions, from the ceiling and the wall, it has lasted now 4 years. Yes, I agree with you that in the months of coming month, April and May, there are sometimes issues of this interior spaces becoming a little warm when all the doors and windows, everything is open and all that. But rest of the year, we have no issues.
Yeah, and it's also very well shaded, right? The openings are well shaded, so then there's no issue.
That's the biggest advantage that we have.
Just two small questions. Yeah. Anybody else? We have something on chat.
There are some questions, I think, on chat, but before Prashant goes there and opens it up, I just wanted to say that it was a wonderful presentation to hear. I think for the sake of the students, an observation about how one can talk about architecture in an honest, direct way, rather than trying to kind of engulf it with words that eventually one is seeking not really within the built but somewhere else. And I thought that that was a very, very good way in which we can understand architecture and what it does to all of us when we move through it and experience it. And that only comes when you have such a strong affinity, a passion for what you're doing. So fantastic, Prashant, and to your entire team. I've been privy to that journey in very small amounts, and it has always been, it's always inspiring to be with them all. So it's really nice. And I think, Prashant, what you can add to your talk is to say that this is a building where you see the building as a laboratory of learning. And the term laboratory would be very useful, because that's how we've seen the CEPT building also. that it's the most useful thing to have a building as a school of architecture from which students can learn in an embodied way. They're there directly, they can see what you're saying. And I think that's the fundamental basis to a lot of learning. I can see that happening very easily at Vadyar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meghal.
There's a question from Aryan, if I can read it aloud, where he's asking you, Prashant, that when you talked about sustainability as being building for permanence or not, if you can read that on the chat box and maybe answer it.
Aryan, the whole point here was this question. I mean, this question of permanence. When one talks about in today's time and space, how fair is it to look at most programs as permanent programs? Because that is how we have kind of got used to certain things. It comes basically from the fact that all of us know 60-70% of our population is going to be urban within a decade or so, or probably 2 decades or so, which puts phenomenal pressure on land and phenomenal pressure on activities within the urban setup. And that then poses the question, like in my case here, how soon can you free up the land? How often or how much is that land required for that activity only? And if a project or if a program can run on a piece of land for a period of time that it is sustainable, that program is sustainable, so be it. And after that, if it has to make way for something else, let it make way for something else. I mean, there's no hard and fast rule. I mean, we as architects have this very strong tendency to believe that what we build will be there till Taj Mahal stays or whatever. So unfortunately, that time is gone. I mean, we have to accept the fact that in fact we are more relevant now if we may make way for people like you to build now. And we step back. I mean, if our buildings have to go to make way for your buildings, so be it. So I mean, that would be probably far more sustainable than hoping that my building will be talked about for ages. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Meghal, there's one more question.
Yeah, I'm just, Prashant, can you read that on chat?
I read that. I think it's a kind of free-flowing knowledge, not fixed by singular pinpoint definitions, but accepting pluralism. Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what those first 3 slides were about. I mean, the whole idea that how much do the students also bring to the table? I mean, that is something we kind of neglect. We assume that we know everything. And when we walk into a classroom or walk into a studio or in a campus, we have all the answers. I think that time is also gone. I mean, the idea that a student walking into the campus probably has sometimes more information than you and I have. And the point is, what do you make with that information? And what do you do with it, which is useful for all of us, not just for the students, also the faculty and the mentors, and as a peer group of people watching or listening to what is happening in these studios. That also is which then obviously takes you away from this idea of dogma and single-minded way of looking at education, saying that this is the only way of doing it right. So it opens up possibilities of all kinds. I mean, this year we have 2 new faculty or 3 new faculty who have joined, and I'm sure over the next 2-3 next year or so, their line of thinking will start influencing the way the studios are run. And one would want it like that. I mean, every time somebody new walks in and every time somebody with a passion for the subject wants to do something, I mean, the space should allow it. And the environment should automatically change for that, in the sense that it's like quoting Coelho somewhere, no, saying that if you have a passion for something, then the universe conspires to see that you get it. So it is like that. So as long as the environment is conducive to it and the passion is there, then things have to change, and they should. I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. But yeah, so I think, you know, like even except with this whole concept of visiting faculty, which was the case when we were studying there as well. You know, you had practitioners with an interest in academics who were coming and teaching. You know, I don't think they had any sort of bubble within which they have to operate. You know, each of our teachers, we learned something different, you know. Of course, masters was a little different, but what I mean to say is, I think what you're saying about, you know, buildings, institutions, the kind of learning that one does, it all comes under the same kind of an umbrella, yeah, where it is allowed to grow in the direction that it's supposed to, yeah.
For example, right now, just yesterday, we were discussing a lesson plan for institutional design. Again, like what you had done in 6th semester, we have it in 6th semester here. And this whole notion of what is an institution today, I mean, post-COVID and with all of us sitting at home and doing Zoom calls and doing all this and rarely being in campus, then what is this notion of an institution then? Is it the physical infrastructure? Is it the laptop screen? What is it? I mean, where do we connect as an institution now? And what hence then becomes the definition of an institution? So which would be a lovely way of looking at a program also of an institution, because somewhere we get so typecast by the typologies that we have got used to. I mean, when you say institution, it has to be an institution of this kind. When you say a cultural center, it is this. When it is something else, it is that. So automatically we build blocks of ideas based on typologies that we have seen or learned. And as a school, I think the best way is to first of all demolish the typology and look at the inquiry, which then demands a program of a certain kind. What will you put together to make these things work? Sometimes you could put together totally disparate objects or disparate programs to make something out of it and then hope that some magic will happen. And you probably don't have a name for it. What kind of a building that is, one doesn't know. But then the program could be interesting. And as students, I think what is important is that to look at those programs which would make these objects of architecture much more sustainable, much more interesting as places where people live. Because at the end of it, like it or not, architecture is but a stage for life at the end of it. And our study finally is a study of life. I mean, as architects, all of us eventually end up talking something about what is happening around us more than the buildings that we live in, and how that then influences the way we build. And as long as that is the journey, I think the programs and the building will automatically get influenced from what you're seeing and observing around you. And which will take you away from known ways of learning these things.
Anybody else would like to ask Prashant question? I mean, I'd love to carry on this conversation, but I don't want to hog the whole thing.
You can always time later.
Yeah. Because I'm a firm believer that the environments that we operate in, see, everybody understands negative environments. Everybody knows environments that kill life or that are, but they're reluctant to sort of say that, yes, it can also add to your sense of well-being, that there is that aspect of architecture which, influences the way people behave within that. When we look at solitary confinement, for example, that's an extreme example of how you modify human behavior. So you can look at it doing the same thing in the other direction as well. So from all of those perspectives, it certainly looks like the first time, it was our students who did the case study at Wadiyat when I was teaching at CMR compared to some of the other schools. And you could see how this would really generate sort of positive energy. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean it in that sort of esoteric sense, but I mean that it's nice to be in a place like that. And it's a place that would, the students would want to be there, which was like what used to happen with CEPT. So you're there, you might not always be working on what, but it's just a part of your life, and it encourages in a positive sort of a direction. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, there's another question.
Amazing. How different would this campus grow if there is a new block coming up, taking the present situation into account? To answer that, somewhere along the way, I think a year or two down the line, we're also contemplating a master's program. Now, the playground at the back, in fact, there's a master plan which has been done, looking at keeping the volleyball court and the basketball court in some ways, and building around it and seeing that if a master's program could also be accommodated with a secondary court. Now we have a court in the middle, and then the library becomes the true heart of the entire campus then, because it becomes a block in the middle, which will divide the two courts in some ways. And the court behind then would be the PG court, and this would become the main court, or if you want to call it that. So there are ideas already being floated, but then, like I said, this is like the title says, it's an experiment in progress. I mean, I can't say that it will be like this or like that, because along the way, I'm sure some other ideas will change, and there are also ideas being floated around of starting a design school along with the School of Architecture, which could also probably come in the same space. One doesn't know. So we're looking at 2-3 ideas running right now. The idea of a design school, which has 2-3 other courses running along with architecture, and also the idea of a master's program, which 3 or 4 of us who have passed out of stepped up pursuing, saying that no, we should have a master's program. So that is also happening on the side. Within a year or two, something will happen, and I'm sure the next block will be again worth looking up to, and will throw up its own set of challenges. One doesn't know what those challenges are right now. But yes, there is some idea of a master plan in place which will accommodate these ideas, and let's see where that goes.
Another quick question, Prashant.
To what degree would autonomy help WCFA to break away from university-affiliated pedagogy? This is something which we have debated with even when we started the school. I mean, the whole issue, should we get associated to the university at all? Or are there other avenues? I mean, there was an avenue of being part of the Open University, and there was another avenue of being part of a standalone institute. But then a standalone was not encouraged because we are only one department. Open University was not accepted by the Council of Architecture because it's an online course. Architecture can't be taught online, so they didn't allow us to do Open University. So we had to get back to the university. But then, having done 6 years with the university, one thing one has realized, I mean, the point is, I mean, when we say autonomy, we are talking autonomy of syllabus and autonomy of teaching things the way we want to. Now that hasn't hampered us in any way. I mean, in the last 6 years, we have done exactly what we wanted to. The syllabus is there as a guideline in terms of whatever is there, but then that hasn't stopped us from pursuing our agendas of what a studio needs to be doing, or what teaching has to happen in history or BC or any subjects for that matter. The faculty have found a way around it. We have found a way around it, and the university is there to give a degree and to conduct exams, and that's perfectly all right. In fact, it is better that it is that way. Otherwise, what would happen is, if we ended up becoming autonomous, there would be a huge amount of administrative activity which would have to be taken into account to run a small department of 40 or 80 intake students, which has an office strength which has probably more than that, because that much of paperwork will get generated because it's autonomy. Instead of that, I would rather be happy with the VTU because they're handling exams, they're doing all the dirty work for us, and we then concentrate on what we are supposed to be doing. So and also it helps because being part of a group of 40 or 45 institutions within Karnataka of architecture, it also generates a space for dialogue with other schools, which should hopefully then start other schools also to take note of what you're doing, and we taking note of what they are doing, and in the process, it helps everybody grow. I mean, to say that only I'll grow and I'll sit in my corner is not the right thing to do. Is that okay?
Yes. I think we've kept you here for an hour and a half. So, yeah, we should let you go now. But thank you so much, Prashant. That was really, really very, very interesting. I've seen it as these case studies, so, but haven't really gone into it in depth.
And I think you should come.
Yeah, and I think you've given us a very sort of down-to-earth and comprehensive presentation, not only on the buildings and the campus, but also the sort of academic orientation, which you're hoping to foster. I will tell you about MASA. In fact, when you had the MASA event, I think it was a celebratory year when Solano had come and Bimal was there and so on. And, so very successful alumni association. So Bimal sort of made this remark that perhaps the best way to build a strong alumni association is to close the school, because the kind of, the kind of bonding that, MASA has, because you enjoyed those first 20 years and then the school kind of closed. Yeah.
Which is also, like I
But
said,
thank you very much. Yeah, sorry.
Something has to close. I mean, for some doors to open, some other doors have to close.
Yes, yes.
So,
But this has been a successful door opening. So, yeah.
Thank you again so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Take this as an opportunity to welcome you to our college. Whenever you're in Bangalore, please do come.
Sure. I would love to visit.
Always
Yeah.
welcome. And anybody else who is part of this audience, anytime passing by Mysore or Bangalore, please do come. I would love to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prashant.